You're listening to The Dead Prussian, a podcast about war and warfare. Hi everyone, Amanda here. I'm just stopping by to ask you for your feedback on the show. It is important to us here at The Dead Prussian to deliver a show that our listeners enjoy. You can leave us a review on iTunes or head on over to our website and fill in the survey at www.thedeadprussian.com/survey.html. We'd love to hear from you.
G'day listeners and welcome to episode 11 of The Dead Prussian. This episode is titled On Afghanistan's Plains, and I'll get to the topic and why it's named that in a minute. First, I'd like to thank everyone for their iTunes reviews. We're getting there, quite a few 5-star ones. Whoever gave me the 4-star one, feel free to bump it up next time you listen to an episode and realise just how great we really are. Also, those people who have been having trouble with Google playing music in the US, please drop us a line and let us know what the error message you are getting is, because I'm being told that everything is good to go. For those people who aren't into Google Play or iTunes, we are on Podbean, Libsyn and Stitcher Radio. We try and get out there on as many distribution applications as possible. Please let me know if there is one that I'm not on, and I'll see if I can get on there. All right, so we've gone through some pretty heavy topics. In last month, we talked about innovation in World War One, and we also talked about the hybrid warriors that we're seeing pop up in the Middle East, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. What we're going to be talking about today is a little bit different, which is quite good, but it's also very much grounded in contemporary warfare and contemporary conflict. My guest today is Barry Alexander. Barry was educated at Sussex and Kent Institute of Nursing, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and the United Kingdom Joint Services Command and Staff College. He is a veteran of 20 years service in the British Army. He enlisted as a private soldier and his career saw him travel the world, undertaking active service in the Balkans, Northern Ireland, Sierra Leone, Iraq and Afghanistan before he retired as a major in 2014. He's also a writer. His poetry has been published in the 2011 anthology Heroes 100 Poems from the New Generation of War Poets. That was by Ebury Press. His debut book, On Afghanistan's Plains, there you go, there's a link to the title of today's episode, is a memoir based on his time leading medics on operations in Afghanistan in 2007. That book is available in both hard copy and ebook format from Amazon. Please check it out. It has had quite a lot of reviews going up. I've seen a few 5-star reviews going up there as well. So check it out. And if you want something to read whilst you're waiting for the book to arrive, log on to Barry's blog at barrynalexander.wordpress.com. You'll see some snippets from the book and also some of Barry's poetry. Barry is based in the UK and he works internationally, which actually works in my favour because it means that I can do this interview at a more convenient time for both myself and also Barry. All right. G'day, Bazza. How are you going?
G'day. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, I've told everyone the official Barry Alexander, the author's word, but I guess the listeners want to know who you are as a former serviceman, former soldier, officer, pretty experienced in terms of your active service. So just tell us a little bit about you, yourself, and, who is Barry Alexander?
Well, you pretty much summed it up quite well in the intro. I'm a registered nurse. I qualified as a nurse in the National Health Service in the UK before joining the Army. My career took me around the world and it spans everything from sort of Cold War era, or just post-Cold War era, through to the present day. I actually cut my teeth in the reserves while I was still at school. So I did that whole stagging on in Germany, digging in and training to fight the Russian hordes back in the day. So as I comment in my book, I actually served in 3 different armies. There was the Reserves Army during the Cold War, at the back end of the Cold War. Then there was the post-Cold War regular service, and then there was the post-9/11 contemporary conflict army. So one army, 3 quite distinct experiences.
It's quite an interesting way to divide it up. I don't think we've had a guest that's quite divided a single army up that way. So for the listeners out there, that's the British forces through the Cold War, post-Cold War, and post-9/11 era. And from Barry's experience, we can obviously tell that that was a varied service while still remaining the British forces. I'm really interested in this warrior poet thing you've got going on. I think it's quite interesting, and veterans writing is something that interests me quite a lot because we're starting to see a lot more of it. So what I want to know is, what made you decide to write about your experience of war?
Well, I was always quite a keen writer and quite into poetry as a youngster, and I started writing poetry in the military after my first tour in the Balkans, and that was a little bit almost a way of trying to get my head around some of the stuff that I'd experienced and seen. I then put my pen down for a number of years and picked it up again in 2011. So and again, that was very much, I found the intention wasn't to seek therapy through writing, but in some respects, sort of catharsis has come about a little bit as a result of writing. With reference to the whole warrior poet thing, I mean, warrior poets are not a new phenomenon. If you go back to ancient Greece, some of the great Greek playwrights, for example, Aeschylus, was a soldier long before he was a playwright and a poet. And so I think and if you look through history, the history of sort of bards and minstrels through the medieval period in Europe, poetry and conflict seem to have almost gone hand in hand. And in fact, in the book, I actually reference some of my thoughts with that, whereby there is a poem, The Battle of Malden, which is an Anglo-Saxon poem, which tells the tale of a fight between Anglo-Saxon warriors and Vikings. And funnily enough, the link there is that the company that I've spent a lot of time working in support of in Afghanistan was C Company, which is Essex Company, the Royal Anglian Regiment, 1st Battalion. And I kind of thought that C Company were the direct descendants of the band that stood against the Vikings at the Battle of Malden.
It's an interesting link. I mean, not too many warrior poets over the time have had ebook distribution possibilities, which is good to see that we're getting more of them out there. What I find very positive about this is that you don't just write, you're not writing in the sense that this is my experience, look how good I am, I went to war. You're writing about your experiences as a leader, but also you're using different mediums. I mean, there's very different ways that you can connect with a reader between poetry and prose. How did you find the difference between poetry and prose and your readers' reactions?
Well, the poetry came before the prose.
Yep.
So after having the poems published in the Heroes anthology, it was actually my oldest stepdaughter drew my attention to an online writing platform called Wattpad. So I started putting some of my poetry on there, and that enabled me to be aware of who was reading my poetry for the first time, and I got quite a good following with the poetry. And at some point, I thought it would probably be a good idea to maybe do some longer stuff, some long line prose, some work to explain the background story behind some of the poetry. And so the first sort of prose work that I did was called The Raid on Mazdarak, which actually tells the backstory of my poem Care Under Fire. Mm-hmm. And the events that poem describes and the events of the raid on Mazdarak took place on the 5th of May 2007, which explains the link to the release date for the book, which was 5th of May this year. So the prose was a way of explaining some of the detail about the poetry, and then obviously that has grown. So one bit of prose led to another, and at some point I thought, I think I probably got enough to think about maybe writing a book. In terms of the poetry versus the prose, I think on Wattpad, the poetry is read more widely than the prose stuff has been. But in terms of the reviews, I was getting some very good reviews for both. So I decided that, yeah, there was probably some value there.
It's an interesting generation, the way that and I'll talk about generation in terms of the generation of or the evolution of your writing as a poet. There's probably a lot of poets people don't really connect with on a personal level outside of their poetry, which you're giving your readers an opportunity to connect with your experiences to tell them how these poems inspired you. For those who are looking at Barry's blog, if you're not looking at it while you're listening, because a lot of you guys listen while you're driving the car, please don't switch over. But when you get into the office, check out his blog. You will see some details on C Company, and also what I like here is there's a poem here called Grendel, which anyone who's done an English undergrad like myself are quite enthralled by the idea of Beowulf and Grendel, because it's our first real English language piece of literature. It's a modern poet's take on a very old story. So I'm a big fan of that. I'm not going to read any of it out because you've used some of the Anglo-Saxon names, and I'm not going to make a goose out of myself on the podcast. But I encourage everyone to have a look at some of the poems that are on the blog. So the blog doesn't necessarily just have snippets of the book; it's got poetry and everything. And what you can see there is that it's a well-developed concept. This is my experience as a veteran and a poet, and this is actually my poetry. And you're giving the readers an opportunity to explore all aspects of your character, which takes me to the next part, which our character is formed by friends, family, colleagues, people we know. How have they reacted to your writing?
That's really an interesting question. I kind of hid my light under a bushel, particularly with regards to to military colleagues. There's that sort of not fear, but you don't want to lay yourself open to a bit of Mickey taking potentially, and I was very concerned that people might perceive that I was looking to attempt to capitalise on the misfortunes of others, the wounded soldiers who passed through my hands by writing about it. And I was certainly not looking to try and portray myself as any kind of a hero. So I wrote the book was quite an advanced stage, and I shared it with some colleagues, some fellow officers that were with C Company mainly, and I gave them the opportunity to be named or not to be named, and I was happy to change names, and I was quite surprised and pleased when all of them said no, we're happy to be mentioned. A couple of them asked for the manuscript and sent the manuscript, so I sent them the manuscript before it was edited, and they actually quite enjoyed it, and they're very supportive of the project. In terms of my family, my wife's been very supportive, as have the kids. My parents, unfortunately, one of the saddest things about publishing when I have done is that unfortunately my mum's quite bad with dementia at the moment, so she doesn't really understand. I wish I'd got to writing this and publishing it a few years ago, before the dementia sort of hit so hard, because it would have been lovely for my mum to have been able to read the book, and likewise my cousin, who unfortunately passed away from cancer last year. So there are people that I had in my heart when I was writing the book that unfortunately will never get to read the book and enjoy it. But by and large, the family and friends have been pretty supportive, and I'm actually quite impressed with how even civilian colleagues that wouldn't necessarily be that interested in military stuff are all quite keen to sort of buy the book and get their hands on it. So In fact, there was one ex-military colleague that was got quite stroppy with me when he discovered that through Facebook that I'd written this book, and I hadn't actually sort of told him what I was doing. So
it's actually quite warming to hear, particularly in the militaries of UK and Australia, and particularly in the UK and Australian culture. We do have a tendency of tall poppy syndrome. I'm not entirely sure if that's something that translates, but they're taking the Mickey aspects of it. And it's good to see that you haven't suffered from that, because by the sounds of it and the very personal story you've said about your family and wanting to share your experiences with them and maybe missing some of those opportunities, it sounds like it was important for you to write so you could share those opportunities with your family and with friends and colleagues. Not those opportunities, those experiences. Do you think it's important for veterans to find creative outlets to talk about their experiences of war?
I think absolutely yes. In terms of previous generations, I think certainly World War One, World War Two, I think an awful lot of veterans came back, took their uniforms off, and never said a word about them to anybody, apart from within the circles of those that they'd shared those experiences with. And I think that's quite a sad aspect, because millions of stories untold, and not only that, from a historical perspective, you run the real risk that that the story of the ordinary soldier would remain untold, and so the only take that you ever get on historic events would be the take of the generals and the statesmen that steered countries and armies through those events, rather than the voice of the ordinary soldier on the ground. From a personal perspective, I have found writing to be quite therapeutic, and so I do believe that veterans would benefit from writing about their experiences or expressing them through other means. There's a great project in UK, I think it's called the Two Lives of... I can't remember the name of the project. But it's a play that involves wounded veterans telling their story, and it takes the life of a young soldier pre-wounding to post-wounding and compares the two. And it's actually been it's been a play on the stage in the West End, and it's been very well received. And I think that's really great that veterans and particularly wounded soldiers are involved in projects like that.
That's an interesting that it's that West End's seeing something very similar. We've had a Army, Air Force and Navy endorsed program that actually took wounded soldiers, turned them into actors to share their experiences in a stage play. Very similar. So that's interesting that form of medium, which is probably something a lot of people these days don't see as popular. Although if you've ever been to the West End in London, you'll know that the stage is alive and kicking, probably much more than what it is here in Australia. Now, your creative outlet is writing. Would you say that poetry is more of an outlet for you, or the experience of writing this book has been more of an outlet? What I'm trying to find out is whether or not you're going to write another book.
The poetry was my primary outlet, and I'm still writing poetry. One of the things that I've tried to do is step away from military poetry and diversify a little bit. So I've written some, as you mentioned, with the Grendel poem. Yep. I've written some non-military poems. I think there probably will be another book. I've got some ideas on the back burner, and there's some half-written fragments which I need to pick up and run with. So yeah, there will be a book, and I think I'm probably going to have a stab at writing some fiction that will draw heavily on factual experiences. So yeah, the challenging thing about writing any form of a book, as I've seen quoted on the web quite a few times, it's just as hard to write a really bad book as it is to write a really good book.
Well, then there's hope for people like me, I guess.
So I will keep on writing, whether things are successful or not, whether they're read or not. I will keep writing.
That's excellent to hear, because you may need to write for a while, because the next question is going to rely on your ability to define the concept of war, and depending on how well you define it, may depend on which way you go. So you may not come away from this as a great military theoretician. That's okay. I think we've already established that I plagiarise everyone else's work anyway, so I'm in that boat. But your definition of war, I think, is probably going to be a little bit different from some of the ones we've had. You can't give the Clausewitzian answer, because I would just ask you to define it again. We've had a few guests that have gotten away with that now. And I've had a few listeners that have asked me why I let them off the hook. So no more letting people off the hook. I'm going to ask you to finish the sentence, war is.
Okay. Well, war is not, in this case, the continuation of state policy by other means. In my personal opinion, war for me is it's orchestrated chaos, it's courage, and it is at the same time both the pinnacle and the low point of human endeavour.
That is a good and unique definition of war is. Look, Barry, it's been great having you on the show. I think everyone can actually benefit from your example, in terms of those people out there who have nothing to do with the military or war but listen to this show out of interest will understand that veterans are probably more than the two-dimensional characters that often get portrayed, and that there's more to a conflict than the official histories that get published in what is and is necessarily a clinical and surgical version of what is a real human experience in both the highs and the lows, and that there are veterans like yourself out there producing material where people can learn about the human experience of both those highs and those lows. Good luck with the book. I know the 5th of May was the launch, and we're recording this for everyone on the 7th of May, so it's early days yet. But thank you very much for coming on, Barry.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And it's been a pleasure having Barry on, as all the listeners can agree. Okay, so that's the end of the episode, folks. But what I want you to do is please feel free to leave us some reviews. Jump over to the Dead Prussian website. That's thedeadprussian.com. And as Amanda told you in the intro, we have a survey going at the moment. It's a 360-degree report for those previous military members who understand what that means. It'd be great to hear what you tell us you want from this show. I can't sit here and interview great guests if I don't know what the listeners want, and I can't ask them the right questions. So send me your survey details. It's all anonymous, so it's different from the review process. Whilst I'd appreciate a review, if you just want to leave some feedback, let us know. You can also contact us through the site. We are expanding the War College, and the War Diary is going to be a regular blog post that occurs once or twice a month. My final point is an excellent notification I've got for everyone out there. There is an announcement that was made on Sunday night here in Australia. There is a new organisation that is linked to an older United States organisation, and this organisation is the Defence Entrepreneurs Forum Australia. The Defence Entrepreneurs Forum is an organisation that is trying to encourage innovation through an entrepreneurial approach in junior leaders in the Australian Defence Force. The parent organisation in America has had some success since 2013, and there's also an organisation in the in the UK, that is picking up this mantle for the British forces. Please feel free to check it out on the Grounded Curiosity page. That's groundedcuriosity.com. Go to the DEF Australia, DEF Australia tab, and you can read all about it. There's also the Twitter account at DEF_AUS. All right, that's enough from me. Until next time, grab a book and crack on.
Join the conversation with us on Twitter at Dead Prussian Pod, on Facebook at The Dead Prussian page, or on our website www.thedeadprussian.com. All show notes for this episode, as well as copyright information, can be found on the website. The Dead Prussian podcast is written, produced and hosted by Mick Cook. It is co-produced by Amanda Levito. The music used throughout is Caught in the Beat by Broke for Free and is used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. All opinions expressed by individuals on the podcast are those of the individual and not necessarily representative of any other organisation.